Hello and welcome to Turning Point Tactics, the competitive Kill Team 40k podcast, focused on giving you the strategies and tactics to seize initiative every turning point. I'm your host Ryan and I'm joined by the snake eyes to my hot plasma, Connor. How you doing this evening, Connor?
I'm good, thanks, Ryan. Obviously, we've been steadily working our way through the match play mission sequence. The next one along will be select Tac Ops. So, did you want to give us your thoughts today on what you look for when selecting Tac Ops?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is clearly one of the most important steps you're going to have when you're going through that initial sequence. It's really important to figure out exactly how you want to play that match and make sure that you select the right archetype to match the playstyle that you're trying to achieve. Now, it might be that your faction is linked to a single archetype and therefore you're only able to do one sort of playstyle and you're going to have to try and work with what you've got. Vet Guard are a great example. They're locked into security and they can't really flex too much around that. But there is quite a lot of assessment that you can do yourself when you're looking at the Tac Ops to figure out which of these 6 that I've got from the actual game is best and which of the faction Tac Ops that I have are going to help me best score these points. Because at the end of the day, it's a third of your points and it's very, very clear that that's where GW from their previous tournaments are making the main tiebreakers for their pairings and placements. So it's really, really critical that you understand exactly, which of these Tac Ops are the best and which are going to be the best ones for you to score reliably. So the first point that I'll make on Tac Ops is the archetype that you're choosing has to match your playstyle. So security is a very defensive playstyle where you want to try and hold effectively your half of the board and you're playing out a long game, denying your opponent movement and denying your opponent being able to get forward into your own objectives. But fundamentally, it is a defensive playstyle. Seek and Destroy is obviously your most offensive playstyle. You want to basically move up, remove any models, and make sure that the models you're removing are the correct ones for your scoring. So it's very aggressive, and if you're an aggressive player, that's probably a playstyle that you want to lean heavily into. Recon is a bit of a more subtle one. It's more about positional and board placement more than anything else. And some of their Tac Ops right now are really, really strong to be able to help you get points that your opponent will struggle to deny you getting those points. And finally, Infiltration. That's going to be, again, a bit more of a late game surge and a bit more of like a playing off your opponent rather than anything else. So most aggressive playstyle, Seek and Destroy. Most defensive playstyle is Security. And Recon and Infiltration are somewhere in between. But there's a few categories that I think are really important when you're trying to look at these Tac Ops to make your own assessment. So in this episode, Connor and I are going to go through and we're going to give an assessment on all of the Tac Ops and in the new mission pack. But what I want to be able to do is give you guys the tools to be able to assess them yourself. Because we're not going to talk about is a faction Tac Ops until we start doing our own individual faction reviews. So I want to be able to give you guys the thoughts to think about, okay, if I have to choose between this one and this one, why am I choosing this or the other? And that's kind of where I want to start. So the first question that I'm going to ask myself when I'm choosing a Tac Op is how much investment does this require from my team? That can be looked at as the number of models or the number of action points, amount of board control that you need, whatever it is, right? So is it one model that you can just throw forwards to be able to achieve this? Is it holding a single objective? Worse than that, is it holding 3 objectives, whatever it is? So how many models is it going to take for me to be able to do this? And then how many models do I have to be able to do that? So as a percentage of your team, let's say that you're playing Vet Guard, holding the center line might only require 2 models, but out of your team of 14, that's a really low percentage of how many models it actually requires. But if you're playing Intercession and you try to hold the center line, secure the center line, well, 2 models out of your 6 is a huge investment in comparison to what your opponents will be able to do. So that's a really good point, I think, for you to think about initially is, how much does this cost me to be able to do initially, and what am I losing as a result of that? The next point that I would say is how easy is it for your opponent to deny it? So if you have a Tac Op, which is Central Control is a great example. Central Control is a fantastic Tac Op that you can quite easily score most turning points, some would think. But if your opponent knows you're going for Central Control, a good opponent is also going to start putting bodies in range of that area to deny you those points. And that's going to be really hard for you to potentially counter, unless you've got the activation advantage or more threatening models to be able to remove those models in an effective way. So you've got to ask yourself the question, if you're an elite player, what is the chances of you throwing a model into that center of the board and having them survive however many activations after they've been there and still be able to score you that point? So it might be that they can't. But let's say you're playing against Phobos and your Intercession. Actually, that might be really easy because they don't have that many models, and you can move your last model on there, and they have one model to kill one activation to kill an Intercessor. Statistically, it's not going to happen. So that's kind of the question you want to ask yourself: is based on the opponent's team and my team, how hard is it going to be for them to be able to deny me these points? Moving on then to action point efficiency. As a rule of thumb, anything that's going to cost you points or cost you action points to do is generically going to be worse than stuff that isn't going to cost you points. Now the reason why is that if you can be shooting people, that can be denying your opponent's Tac Ops, but if you're having to use your own actions to be able to get your own points, that's not going to be being used. And if you're on an action-based mission primary, let's say you're playing loot or secure, then you might need that action point to be able to do the primary mission as well. So you can't necessarily move on to an objective, capture it, and then do your other action-based secondary like transponder or something like that. So that comes down to action point efficiency. It might be that you've got loads and loads of points or action points in your team, and you think, you know what, the fact that I lose 1 or 2 here is irrelevant because I've got so many chaff models that I don't mind too much about losing those action points. Or it might be that you think, actually I'm really limited and therefore won't be able to do it. When we talk about seek and destroy, a lot of their action points are fundamentally tied with killing other models. So that's a good use of action point efficiency because you want to be killing those models anyway. So the fact that you're investing a shoot action to kill someone is largely relevant because you want to be doing that, and therefore it's not going to hurt you quite as much as before. The next point I would say is think about how much board control your objective actually requires. So let's say you're playing security and you want to hold them back. The board control that you need is 50% of the board. Now, if you were to combine that with another Tac Op that maybe requires you to take an enemy home objective, well, now you have to be maintaining 50% of the board under your own control, whilst also potentially controlling that area by their objective. And that can be a huge amount of board control to achieve. And you might not have the models required to be able to do all of that, particularly then if you start combining it with secure centerline, where you have to hold models back onto the centerline, or central control, or whatever else it is. So I think when you're evaluating and assessing these Tac Ops, you have to think, okay, how much of the board do I need? And then where does the terrain sit on the board to support that? So it might be that you can look at the way the board is laid out and see that it's going to be really, really hard for the enemy to get into your board half based on their terrain, or maybe it's going to be really, really easy for them to do that but hard for them to sit on the center line. And then you can make that decision between, all right, so maybe I can't get the board half but I can get the center line, or vice versa, and you can start to make those decisions. And the final point that I would say is, how many opportunities do you have to score that objective? Obviously we have 4 turning points in Kill Team. If you can score it every single turning point, that's a really useful way to be able to go, okay, I didn't get it turn 1, who cares, but maybe I can get it turn 2, maybe I can get it turn 3, maybe I can get it turn 4. If you have a Tac Op which can only be scored in the last 3 turns, well, that's, intrinsically less good than other Tac Ops, because there's a chance that you don't score it on turn 3 or turn 4, for instance. Or worst case scenario, if you only have 1 turn in which you can actually score that Tac Op, and that could be quite bad for you in the sense that, well, I missed it for whatever reason, or my opponent denied me that point, and therefore I've lost 2 VP because I couldn't quite get that one opportunity to score. Whereas maybe had you taken a less risky Tac Op, you could have scored 1 point in turn 2 and 1 point in turn 3, and then move on from there. So that's kind of like the way that I'm looking at it, is those sort of key categories. And then once you've done that and we make that assessment, you can then think about how reliably you're going to be scoring those Tac Ops. And as a result, you can then go, right, I'm planning my game based on taking reliable Tac Ops and moving forward from there. Do you have any sort of questions on that, Connor, about how we're assessing these Tac Ops?
Something I sort of noticed while I was listening to you then. So you talked a bit about synergizing playstyles, say for instance like aggressive playstyles and seek and destroy, and then killing a model is also earning you Tac Ops. That's brilliant. And you did touch on the map and the kill zone. Do you ever look at that and think about there's opportunities here to synergize that? So like sometimes I've noticed that objective markers overlap the center lines. There's an opportunity there to be doing the mission and also doing your Tac Ops at the same time. How much does that impact your decision making?
That's a great point, right? And that comes right into that action point efficiency. So we had it when we were playing Creep versus Vet Guard the other day, and I was trying to make a decision between either secure center line, central control, and hold them back. And I was trying to look at where the objectives were going to be and where I can position myself on them. And it, to me, looked like it would be really, really hard for me to get central control because there was no objectives that were nearby. So therefore, I'd have to be moving models onto that purely for that purpose. And then at the same time, I thought, I don't think I'm going to be able to get secure center line because it'd be easy for you to get models on there. And I ended up having to try and take quite a big flex in what I would normally do. So you absolutely have to look at that map layout and start making those assessments. And it might be that you can look at it, and then when you get to the next level of play, start thinking, well, what is my opponent looking for here? And that's where you can maybe roll it back to that board setup question and go, based on the fact that my opponent is bringing security, I'm actually going to take this side of the board because I know that I can sit people on the center line and deny them that Tac Op really, really easily, and I find it easier to potentially deny them, hold them back, something like that. So yeah, 100% look at the map, make that assessment, and start thinking, okay, how am I going to score my own points? What's best for me? And then how can I start denying my enemy points? And that's going to be the next level of play up from there. Okay, I think it's probably worthwhile, Connor, that we move into our tier list, if you're ready for that.
Yeah, it makes sense. You've sort of laid it out. Did you want to confirm how you've ranked these again?
Yeah, so in the same way that we had the faction tier lists, we've gone for the same S through to D tier list rating, where at the bottom is your D tier, and that's where I think they're Tac Ops that need buffs. So they're not very reliable for whatever reason, or they're hard to achieve, and therefore I think that they need a little bit of help to make them more competitive. If they don't receive any of that, then my suggestion would be to players that these are probably the ones that you want to avoid. C tier, these are again a bit more situational or easier for your opponent to deny, and therefore you need to start thinking, okay, in this instance, I might not be able to get these quite so reliably. It might be that they're reliant on initiative or something like that as well. Your B tier is above average. These are the ones that are probably going to take your deck every now and then. Going forward, you want to make sure that they're in your deck because they're going to be a reliable 1 point scorer, maybe a 2 point scorer for you. A tier is a strong tier. You're expecting to get 2 points from these Tac Ops if you play a game correctly, and I would suggest that they are your go-to options in your relevant areas of archetypes. S tier are almost guaranteed 2 points. It would be almost impossible for you not to get 2 points by using S tier, and that's kind of my view as to why they need to be nerfed, because if your opponent can't stop you from scoring 2 points on a Tac Op via any means, then that's sort of not fun to play against, and maybe leads to a sort of poor play experience, and also just means that your decision making as a player is it's irrelevant what happens. I'm always going to take this Tac Op because there's nothing you can do about it. So that's how we ranked them, similar to what we had before. So S tier needs nerfs, D tier needs buffs, and then we have the C as standard, B above average, and A as your strong picks, and we'll go from there. So I think it's worthwhile us just ranking where I think the actual archetypes sit based upon this tier list, and you'll see as we go through, as a result of how it's all doped out, where I think the various archetypes are. But in sum, I think the weakest archetype is the infiltration deck, and that's the easiest for opponents to deny, the hardest for you to maximize your own VP based on your action point efficiency and your ability to opportunity to score, etc, etc. So I think that's probably the weakest. And as a deviation from all previous decks, I think security now sits in number 3. It's a very, very tight balance between Seek and Destroy and security. They are both really, really good, but I think the action efficiency of Seek and Destroy now can mean that they potentially prefer it to security, and I think security now sits in the 3rd position. Then I think it's Seek and Destroy, and finally I think it's Recon. I think Recon is the strongest because they have a couple of Tac Ops that are so hard for your opponent to deny, and it's so easy for you to be able to maximize them going forwards, which makes it really, really hard to play against. Particularly now that we have freedom of choice, you can choose that one with no risk of losing something else, and you also can then choose a faction Tac Op to potentially backfill any of the weaker choices that are in that deck and make sure that you have a solid deck of 3 going forwards. So starting at D tier, and I think probably the worst of the Tac Ops is install device. So this is a infiltration Tac Op where you have to effectively place a device costing you AP on an objective that you control that's also inside your opponent's territory. Now, all of this means that you have to have ball control in your opponent's half. You have to spend AP to achieve it. You then have to stop your opponent from being able to retake that objective, which is what they want to do anyway. So it's AP efficient for your opponent to deny it, etc, etc. For me, not a good Tac Op. It's not going to score you much, and your opponent's going to actively seek to get rid of it, unless you can table your opponent by like turn 2 or something. That's probably not a good game plan to have. Next along, I think it's Assassinate Target. This is Seek and Destroy Tac Op, where again you're looking to nominate a target, but your opponent gets to select. So again, your opponent can select a potentially poor model they don't care about losing or not using during the game, hide them at the back of the board, and then that requires you to be able to get all the way up the board to kill them. that can be really rough to achieve. Now, it's better against elite teams because potentially your opponent doesn't want to use or lose one of their models. Again, generically, still pretty poor. Plant Transponder is a recon Tac Op next in D tier. Again, it's going to require you AP, but actually when you take into considerations all the limitations that you need to be able to do the action required with this, it's so hard for you to achieve. And it requires ball control, it requires AP to get it to do it, and I can't see it happening very easily. Potentially a team like Corsairs with their light fingers have a better option for this, but generically I think they just have so many better Tac Ops that they'd rather have. Next in D tier, Stalk Target. So this is a infiltration Tac Op. You have to select an enemy target and end the turn with a model on conceal within 3 inches of it, but not within engagement range. And the problem with this is A, you're telegraphing, so you're telling your opponent, I want to try and get close to X model, and they can just run that model away or put them somewhere where it's hard for you to be able to get in range of them. And then you can't charge them and sit in engagement range, so you have to move nearby. So even against an elite team, probably going to overwatch you, or they can set themselves in a position where by moving into that range, you're going to get shot, or whatever it is. So that can be really, really rough to play around, and I don't really know how you can reliably do it against a good opponent every turn. Maybe you'll get 1 point, but I can't see it much, to be honest. I think it's a pretty bad attack. Okay, then into C tier. So this is your standard tier, and it's going to start with Executioner. Now, this is a Seek and Destroy Tac Op, and many people on the surface will think this is quite a good one because you effectively select a model and say, I want this model to be my Executioner, and you select another model and you say, I want to kill that model this turn. So on the face of it, it's quite good, and it is okay for elites because you're saying, well, I want to get that action efficiency by killing models and move up the board and whatever else, and that's great. The downside is that you're selecting your Executioner to then kill a model, which is initiative based, and then it's reliant on you reliably killing that model, which could go wrong for you. So you have one opportunity to do so, and then if your Executioner is killed, that then removes all opportunities for you to score this in subsequent turns. So potentially if you're a really durable, really killy team, Legionary maybe might be able to pull this off in session, maybe. But I think what's more likely to happen is you might win initiative turn 2, get 1 kill, get a VP, and then have that model removed from the game, and you'll never get your second VP from it if you're against a good opponent. Or, worst case scenario, you lose initiative, and you're not getting a VP at all because that model's killed before you can score. So that's kind of my thought on Execution. When it comes to Escort Operative, which is the next one, which is the Purity deck, again, it's not bad. It's better than Plant Banner was, because now you don't have to secretly select it before the game. You're doing it you have an option of the first or second turning point, but you're always choosing the second turning point, never choose the first. And you want to choose a model that's going to be in good position, potentially score you these points. The downside is it has to be on turn 4, and you have to have a model that's really durable. So at the end of the battle, it's a long time for you to keep the model alive when people are actively trying to kill them. And as a result, you have to be really careful that you're actually going to get that model to where it needs to be. So you're at best denying yourself one model the entire game and then trying to do like a run and sprint, but that might only get you one VP. But to get within 6 inches of your opponent's kill zone edge, you have to be moving this guy out turn 3, maybe even turn 2, and that's quite a lot of distance to cover whilst having a pretty big bounty put on their head to be able to kill. Next is going to be Seize Defenses. So Seize Defense is an infiltration-based Tac Op, and that's going to be where you're effectively trying to gain control of your opponent's barricades. And again, this could be good, depending on where your opponent places them, but it could also be terrible. So if your opponent holds all their barricades really far back because they know that you're a player that likes Seize Defenses or whatever, then there's a risk that you're never going to be able to get close to them. But also, most of the time, the reason why your opponent is placing barricades is because they want to put a model in cover on that barricade. So you're now committing more models, like 2 say, to every one of their barricades to gain control of it. And I can see that being really easily denied, or putting yourself out in really bad positions to be able to try and achieve this. So it's costing you a lot of investment from your team to get that point, and I can't see it working out too well. So I don't think it's particularly great. Secure Vantage is the next, which is a recon-based Tac Op. I think it's really good for big teams, like Horde teams, because if you have the activation advantage, then your final move could be running someone up onto advantage, and then there's no overwatch or anything like that, and they can score that point. The downside of this is most maps only have 3, 4, 5 advantages, maybe, and the ones that are then not within range of your deployment zone is probably closer to the 2 to 3 mark. And getting your models all the way up there can be quite difficult. So I think you'll probably see more likely that you only score one of these points because of the amount of investment it takes for you to move and dash your guys onto the vantage, which then means they're not scoring mission primaries, they're not killing people, and they're not doing other things for you. Next on the list is going to be Headhunter. Headhunter is a seek and destroy Tac Op specifically focused around killing your opponent's leader. Now, this can be good against elite teams when they have to use their leader effectively, but in most instances that I've seen when you're playing against a horde team, their leader is sat back, out of the way, and they're not going to give you those shots until potentially way too late. So Headhunter for me is one of those ones where you might score 1 point on turn 3 and turn 4 when you move up, but more likely you're going to not get the points that you really want moving forwards. Next we have an ITD, Tac Op, Secured Unexplored Rooms. This is again somewhat similar to Secure Vantage, but in a way is easier for an opponent to deny. As soon as you start telling people that you're trying to get into a particular room, it becomes easy for them to then put models into that room to deny you, or force you to overcommit and put more models into that room than you would want to do, who are then in a threatening position for next turn. So if you're having to commit 2 models into a room that can then be potentially killed, that's going to make you in a bad position when you're moving forwards, going, okay, well now I need to try and figure out how I'm gonna solve this, because I've just lost 2 models at the start of the next turn because they were overexposed from last turn. Finally, rounding off C tier is Hold Them Back. This used to be Hold the Line, and it used to be incredibly strong, but now, because it's half the board, actually it's quite easy for your opponent to deny. So you need to be keeping a huge amount of board control, 50% of the board, away from your opponent to stop them scoring this, and it only requires one of their operatives. So now you see teams like Crew, you see teams like Star Striders, and they have some really, really fast operatives. At the start of turn 2, or at the end of turn 2, sorry, you can just move up and just deny you this without you being able to score it. And most of the time, your opponent wants to be pushing into your mid-board and into your territory to score their Tac Ops. So every other archetype effectively wants to be in your half of the board on turn 2, 3, and 4 to be scoring. And therefore, again, when it comes to that action point efficiency, it's very, very efficient for them to be moving forwards to score their own points, and at the same time deny your points. Any thoughts on the C tier or D tier, Connor?
Not really. I was just thinking about the install device Tac Op. I was wondering about some infiltration armies like commandos, for instance, if they had any opportunity to be able to do something early on turn 1. But for most teams, they're going to be struggling to get into the opponent's half or get to the mid-center line on turn 1. And like you said at the beginning, you want to maximise the opportunities to score this. And if you're limiting yourself to turn 2 onwards or turn 3 onwards, it's a tricky Tac Op to have. I feel in general you've made good assessments for these Tac Ops.
No, I think you make a great point there as well. So let's say that Commando is doing install device. So you spend a CP to forward deploy someone, to move them into your opponent's half, to get on a objective and then do the action, and then somehow stop your opponent at the same time moving 2 bodies onto that objective to deny you it, which is in their board half, so it's really close to their own deployment. I think it's so easy for your opponent to stop you from scoring that.
Yeah.
And it's cost you CP, it's cost you potentially a model who's now really up threat, who's going to die, and their own activation to achieve. So I think that could be really rough for them. In my head, that's one of the ones where you're quite easily denied. I think we'll move into above average.
Sounds good.
So for B tier, we're going to begin with another infiltration Tac Op implant. This is quite a good one in a sense that you're likely to score it if you have guys that you don't care too much about losing. The only downside is it does require a bit of investment. So if your guys aren't very good at melee and you're charging in and doing implant, there's quite a high chance that you're going to lose that model as a result. Now, it might be that you don't mind too much doing that, but it might be that you're now making a choice between killing models or doing your Tac Op, and that can be really rough when it comes to denying your opponent points as well. And I've seen this time and time again with Commando players who are trying to achieve implant with only 4 attacks, and they're probably only getting 3 hits, and they're realising that by the time that they've hit someone once, been parried, they now have to choose between actually killing the model or scoring their Tac Op, and they don't get to choose which one it is. So that's really rough when it's then, I'll score my Tac Op, well, you won't kill me, and that can be difficult for them to be able to work around. Next on the list is going to be protect assets. This one actually received a bit of a buff because in the last edition, quite a few of the objectives you didn't necessarily need to sit on for very long, whereas now, pretty much all of the objectives you want to have models on at all times. Well, 2 of 3. The last one is you're going to be moving models back and forth onto it anyway. So for loot and secure, you want to be moving models onto that, or at least at the end of turn 1, there's going to be models positioned for you to be able to shoot. The downside is it has to be 2 or more, and usually you'll see that with the 6 model or the 6 objective layout, there's sort of 2 models that are in threat at one time on maybe the central objectives, and you'll kill one of them at the start of your turn, and the other one, they'll move off of that objective into a safe place until the end of the turn, where they'll then move back onto the objective, and that can be really easy to deny. So therefore you've only really achieved 1 kill, not 2, and therefore you haven't quite got what you wanted. And similarly, if you're playing against elite players, trying to kill 2 elites on an objective a turn can be a really tough ask for the killing power of a few teams. So that's a potentially difficult one to achieve reliably every turn. Next in B tier is going to be outflank. That's a recon-based Tac Op where you have to get effectively more APL on the sides of the board than your opponent has. Now, it's okay, but again, when it comes to being able to deny, your opponent can just throw models out onto the side of the board, potentially. And if the board isn't laid out properly, you might find that actually it's very hard for you to get your models exactly where they need to be in a safe place to then score you outflank. So that's again one of those ones where it's map dependent, it's opponent dependent, and actually even if you are throwing quite a few models towards it, it's still quite easy to deny. And if you end up with having 2 models on each board edge in the far flanks, maybe even in light cover exposed, just to deny your opponent or just to get that 1 VP, then your opponent's just going to pick those models off next turn, and it's going to cost you so many models consistently to be able to move through that. I'm going to batch the next 2 together. We have Seize Ground and Seize Access Point. Seize Access Point is the ITD version of Seize Ground. Now, I quite like it as a Tac Op because again, it's a quite easy to score Tac Op where you just need to get 2 models next to a piece of heavy terrain or an access point that you yourself decide at the start of the game. Downside again though is that can be quite easy to deny, and you only get 1 opportunity to score it. So let's say you end the game with only 2 models and you have to rush those models onto that Seize Ground point, and then suddenly someone just throws a model in there or a couple models in there, they can deny you that VP at the end, and that can be really rough where you've fought hard to try and do it, but you've just lost too much during the attrition game and don't have the model required to be able to maximize it at the end. Next in B tier, we have Subversive Control. This is an infiltration-based Tac Op, which is only scored though in the 3rd or 4th turning point, and that's where you need to get into your opponent's territory and control an objective marker that's not on the center line. And if you do that, you get a VP. I like it because again, you're moving forwards and it's quite action efficient, doesn't cost you anything. You want to be moving onto objectives anyway, but at the same time, it is quite a lot of board control where you have to move up and you have to be taking that distance. And if you haven't got the model advantage in turn 3 and turn 4, then it could be quite easy for your opponent to kill those models going forwards. So with only 2 opportunities to score, you really need your turn 3 and turn 4 to be good. If you can table your opponent, that's great, but at the end of turn 2, you're definitely going to score this. But realistically, you might struggle if it's a very close game and your opponent might be able to kill those key models and stop you from being able to score that tackle. Okay, into A tier. These are the tier that I think you should be taking pretty much as your staple most of the time, and you should be really building a deck around them, because I think they're the easiest ones to achieve and the most reliable out of the Tac Op deck. So starting with Infiltration, it's probably the weakest of the A tier, but I think it's Gather Surveillance. So that's where you're going to select an operative on your kill team, and they have to end their turn within the enemy's territory and more than 3 inches from enemy operatives. Now, you can make that your very last activation, so you can wait and see where your enemy is positioning themselves, and then move and dash your model to wherever they need to be able to score it. It only costs you 1 model, and you get to choose the model that it is. So you can think about that from your perspective. Okay, I know that I want to achieve this, and maybe it's something as simple as I'm going to be Wormblade. I'm going to use the deep strike stratagem, and I'm going to deep strike someone in here, and they're going to dash over the halfway point, and they're going to score me this point, and it's really hard for my opponent to be able to actually deny me that unless they see it coming and they position models correctly. Because you can put it anywhere you want, it's a guaranteed 1 VP potentially. Next on the A tier list is going to be eliminate targets. So, eliminate guards. So guards is where you want to basically kill a model that is on an objective during the turning point. Now, the fact that turning point 1, there's going to be likely no one on any objectives unless your opponent forward deploys and gives you that opportunity. But at the end of turning point 2, there's going to be a whole host of people that you can then, or at the beginning of turning point 2, a whole host of people that you can then potentially get this off of. And you can choose the models that you think your opponent doesn't want to activate first, to make sure that they are then having to make difficult choices between either denying you a point or scoring their own point. So that can be a really good way of saying, oh, you know, if you're playing against, say, breaches, and you choose the model that's a bit weaker, that's not going to be their candidate for blitz, you can then try and force them to not activate that guy or their more threatening model, to try and save them from losing a point somewhere else. And that can be a really mean way of playing it against them, where they have to make a choice now between, do I get the guaranteed kill with this stratagem that I want to use, or am I going to give you a VP? And that can be hard for them to make that decision. Next is going to be Courier, which is a recon-based Tac Op. And again, this is going to be a Tac Op that you can score effectively on any turning point, but you have to be pretty fast to be able to score it on turning point 1. But what the Tac Op is you choose a model yourself, and then if that model ends within 6 inches of your opponent's drop zone, you score 1 VP. And if you achieve that on a second turn, you score 2 VP. Now, I see this as being an almost guaranteed way to achieve 1 VP and a semi-reliable way of being able to achieve 2 VP. Now, you can wait until turning point 3 to reveal this. You don't have to reveal it at turning point 1. So you can wait until you know exactly which model is going to be safe, and then last moment you can throw them out on turning point 3, score a point, and then score that point again in turning point 4. Or if you know that potentially you've got a model that's got super conceal or whatever, you can move that model into your opponent's territory at the end of turning point 1, score a VP, maybe try and keep them safe or protect them during that turning point 2, and then score it again later on. That can be a really good play to get you two early points moving forwards, but I think there's some better ones in recon, which is going to be why I prioritise them over this. Next, we have a security-based Tac Op, which is Secure Centerline, which I quite like because it's actually quite a cognitive load to remember exactly where that centerline is and be positioning models on it correctly the entire time. And it might be that you compare this quite nicely with sitting on objectives and or central control, another Tac Op that we'll come to later. So there is a chance that you can move guys up and be doing 3 things at once, which is really action efficient with them. And you can do that if you have action advantage right at the end of the turn. So your opponent might have to put models out of place that they don't want to do to be able to deny you this, which you can then be picking off with your heavy and special weapons. And then right at the end of the turn, you can throw forward some chaff units and secure this as an easy VP. And the exact same can be said for central control. Teams like Vetguard are fantastic at this kind of thing because they have the ability through the spotter and through the demo mine to be able to not guarantee a kill, but reliably kill any model that you put into that central control bubble. And if you do, you're going to lose them, and they still have the activation advantage to potentially then throw models later, subsequent to that, back onto the objective going forwards. Next, we have Rob and Ransack, which is a seek and destroy based Tac Op. And this is really good because you can keep it hidden and choose exactly when you want to reveal it. And it's when you kill a model in engagement range and they're not within 3 inches of another model, you can then score that 1 VP. And if that model survives until the end of the game, you're going to score a second VP. This is almost a guaranteed 1 VP if you're a melee focused team, because you know you can charge out, get that kill, and get away again. But also, if you hold it until turn potentially 3 or turn 4, you can then make sure that it's really, really hard for your opponent to deny you that, because you can say, I'm going to kill this guy, and then at the start of next turn, I'm going to run them away on a conceal order, and you're not going to have the opportunity to be able to kill them back, which is really useful. Next, we've got Surge Forwards, which is again a recon-based Tac Op. Now, the reason why I prefer this over Courier is because you can do it with any model, and you have 3 opportunities to be able to do it. And all you need to do is get 4 APL worth of models within red of your opponent's drop zone, and you score 1 VP. So you can potentially do this on turn 1, although it is quite far to be able to get out the board. If you're a really fast team, you can potentially do this on turn 1. But more likely, you're looking towards doing this at the end of turn 2 and turn 3, and you can max it quite easily. And if it goes wrong for you on one of those turns, you always have another turning point to be able to try and get it. So this is, I think, is a really reliable way of scoring the points. And because it doesn't require an objective control or anything like that, it's simply have those models within range of that deployment zone, and if you achieve that, you're going to score the point. So it's going to be very difficult without killing those models for your opponent to deny you those points. If you have activation advantage, you can get out the board and do that yourself without them having the opportunity to do so. Or if you have really durable models, you could also potentially do that, and that would be another way to potentially score those points. Finally, rounding out A tier, we have Rout, which I think is the strongest of the Seek and Destroy Tac Ops. Now the way this one works is you have to get one of your models within 6 inches of your opponent's drop zone and achieve a kill. And then if you do that again on a subsequent turn, you achieve a second kill. So you're really looking for turn 2, 3 and 4 to do this, but it's exactly what Seek and Destroy teams want to be doing. They want to be getting up threat, they want to be in their opponent's drop zone, and they want to be killing models. And if you look at how well it's going to tie with all of the other Tac Ops that are out there, so it could be denying people a hold them back, it could be denying people their escort operative, Tac Op, whatever it is, or it might be making it so that it's really hard for them to then gather surveillance, whatever, if you kill the right model. You're doing exactly the things that you want to be doing, and it's very action efficient, and it's scoring your VP. And it's not tied to a single model. So if it goes wrong on one attack, you can then potentially move a new model up and have another go to be able to do it. And that's really, really useful for that reliability of scoring 1 or 2 points. And finally, we're into S tier. This is the one that I think is potentially a bit broken because it's so easy to achieve, and that's going to be recover item. You get to place this wherever you want in your opponent's territory, but note that can be 0.1mm over the halfway line, which then means that you can collect it with a pickup action within 1 inch of the halfway line, and therefore you're collecting it without ever crossing into your opponent's territory. And then if you pick it up and you run away with it or control it, you can then score a VP. So if you can't pick it up because you don't have the movement, you can just move and dash onto it at the end of the turn and score it because you're within 2 and you control it. Or if you're a team like Crew, you can move over there, pick it up and run away. Starstriders can do the same, Corsairs can do the same. This is an insanely strong Tac Op, and I think the way it needs to be changed is the placement needs to be within 3 of your deployment zone or something like that, or outside of 3 of your enemy's deployment zone, but not what it is currently. Currently, it's really easy for you to score, and if you're taking recon, you need to be taking recover item because it's so reliable, it's so hard to deny, and it's almost a guaranteed 2BP. That rounds off the tier list, Connor. What do you think about that?
I've got 2 things. One's just an observation, really. If you look at the tier board now, if you remember what you said at the start, you said that you thought Recon was the best Tac Op, then Seek and Destroy, then Security, and then Infiltrate was perhaps the weakest one. And I think if we look at the tier board now, we can somewhat see that actually by looking at it, but it also, to me, looks quite tight. It looks quite balanced. There's a little tweaking that might need to be done to Infiltrate and Recon, but they're in a good place, I think. That's what my gut's telling me anyway.
Yeah, it is. It's a very narrow difference between each of the tiers. So it's definitely tight, and it's not like one's going to definitely win you the game or anything like that. It's just there are some that are subtly better than others. It's far, far better than what we had in the old Tac Ops, I think.
So then, the other point that I wanted to make, you've made a good point there. I'm a big advocate for, don't ask for nerfs and buffs unless you've got like an idea of how to do it. So you've given us an idea of how you would nerf recover item. There were obviously the 4 Tac Ops at the bottom that need buffs. How would you go about buffing them?
So I think for Stalk Target, it probably needs to be either an increased range, so maybe going up to 4 inches rather than 3 would be nice, because then it gives you a bit more of an ability to do. Or another option I'm trying to think is that you could nominate a stalker and they have to go and get close to someone rather than nominate one model. I don't know, it's a tough one. I think the range is probably going to fix that. For the plant transponder, again, difficult to fix.
I think it's that 2 inches. That 2 inches means that, I know what they're trying to do. They don't want you doing it in cover, and it's impossible for them to oik you out and spot you, and you just get 2-3 points. But in doing so, it's a really narrow section of the board. So it's in the opponent's half. That's already 50% of the board. And then if you think there's going to be half of a kill zone's terrain in that half of the board, to get within 2, or not within 2 of, and also you have to include barricades in that as well. So much of the board is denied. There's probably only like 1 or 2 spaces for you to actually go out and get that. I wonder if tweaking that 2 inch might help. Or
I think that's a great point. If you make that 2 inch into a 1 inch, because you then couldn't still be in cover because you'd be greater than 1 inch.
Yeah.
And therefore you would be in the open, but it means where you can actually place it becomes quite a lot easier. So you might be able to get away with it, because as you say, you already has to be in your opponent's territory. So you've halved the board initially, and then when you look at how much terrain there is on the board, and then you put a 2 inch bubble around all that terrain. I wonder if on some of the maps it's actually impossible to achieve. It's just based on where it is. And then if you can find a position, it then has to be 6 inches from the other one. So I think you're right. Maybe make that down to 1 inch, and then maybe make the 6 into 4 inches or something like that. That could be a good one going forwards. Seek and Destroy, the assassinate target, it should be you choose the target that you're trying to assassinate. So if it became my choice to choose, that could be a really good way to deny. So you can choose the Vet Guard Melter Gunner or the Vet Guard Demo guy, and suddenly they don't want to use it in a threatening way. That'd be a really good way of making that one a much more valid option than what it is currently. And then install device, I think maybe should just be free if you control the objective. So it should be at the end of the turn, if you control an objective, a device is installed, and then you can try and score the next point there. But trying to go to a thing, spend an action point, and then wait until the next turn to score just seems really rough. Or you make it so that you do the install device and then it scores at the end of the turn. Maybe that's another option. But each of the Tac Op decks have flex in the other Tac Op they can take. So I don't think they are critical. They buff them straight away. I do think Recover Item probably needs a bit of a nerf because it's just free VP at the moment, or that's what it seems. But yeah, that's probably how I would fix those four.
Nice.
Did we have a question from the audience, Colin?
We do actually, yeah, and it ties in quite nicely. So, Ryan, when it comes to teams with multiple Tac Op archetypes, how do you choose which to run? Do you consider the faction or the opponent and that aggressive defensive mentality?
I think it's a fantastic question, and hopefully we covered a bit of it already, which is why we sort of held off on answering it until this episode. But I'm gonna just go through the main points that I think. So, firstly, multiple archetypes. How do you choose which to run? So the standard ranking that I sort of said at the start is, I think the weakest archetype is Infiltration, then Security, then Seek and Destroy, and then Recon. So if I had the options, I'm probably going to choose Recon, and if I can't, I'll choose Seek and Destroy. If I can't, I'll choose Security, and finally I'll look at choosing Infiltration. That's kind of how it looks to me at the moment. But you absolutely need to look at what your opponent has on the opposite side of the table when you're making that decision. So it might be that you look at your opponent and you think, there is no way that based on what they've got, I'm going to achieve whatever this particular objective is, because I know that they've got something that's going to directly counter that, and therefore I'm not going to go with that option this time. And you just have to play around that a little bit. But as a rule of thumb, I really like taking Tac Ops that my opponent cannot stop. So I think Recover Item is fantastic because I know full well that my opponent is going to be unable to achieve or deny me that. And then something like Surge Forwards is another one. It's a guaranteed thing for me to be able to do. But let's say that you're not going for that recon thing. Maybe you just want to try and focus on things that you can pair really well with other win conditions. So again, something like Route, where you want to be up threat and killing people. Well, that might work well if you know that you're trying to get onto your opponent's backline objectives and make those kills there as well. Next, I like things that are certain actions. So if I can remove dice at any time from a game, I will try to do it. So for me, I would prefer to have multiple options of being able to achieve something with dice or roll no dice at all, which is why I think Recon is so strong at the moment, because I know that if I get models within X range, it doesn't matter what my opponent does unless they kill those models. They're now rolling dice, they're now taking the risk of it going wrong, not me, and that can be really nice as a way to potentially avoid losing points. So avoid any sort of dice rolls where you can, make certain actions is how I'm choosing that. And then into your next question, do you consider the faction or your opponent? Now, I think you're taking your faction into consideration, because you have to look at what they're bringing, what they're good at, and how it's going to work for you. So, for instance, Headhunter against, let's say, Wormblade, a team that likes to stay on conceal at the back of the board, and the leader likes to stay alive for as long as possible, is probably going to be a bad choice. But Headhunter against maybe, say, Legionary is a bit more worthwhile, because they really want to use that champ or that chosen to get up threat and start killing models. So that could be a good option where you go, normally I wouldn't take this, but now I will. And then you can pair that with your knowledge of your opponent. Now, clearly we talk about generic tournaments here, where we say maybe you don't know what your opponent is like, and you don't know their play style, but maybe you do. So maybe you know your opponent's really aggressive and they're more likely to expose their leader to a Headhunter kill early on. But also note that it might be that you're reading into that, but then they also know you, and they know that you're expecting it, and they then give you a different look. This happens in Jiu-Jitsu, doesn't it, Connor?
Yeah, it can. I think I know what you're getting at. The idea of trying to bait someone into a certain play so that you can, they think you're going to do one thing, but you've actually planned a different thing in response to that. Yeah,
and it's that kind of thing of, you're playing against a really aggressive player, and you have a lot of chemistry, you know the way they play, and you're going, all right, I know that this guy is going to come out, and I'm going to build my Tac Op deck around the fact that they're going to be hyper aggressive, and then they just give you a completely different look, and they go, I thought you were going to do that, and I gamed it, and now I'm going to go really defensive, and suddenly your entire game plan is thrown, and that can be really rough. So I would say yes, where possible, like use that assessment of what your players, your opponent's play style is like. But that's probably more driven by team than it is by play style. And don't get caught out if they then play you by then mixing up their play style to catch you off guard. But that's kind of what my advice would be. Any other thoughts that you have on that one, Connor?
No, I really like it, and I actually want to expand on it and get your thoughts if I can. You mentioned gaming it a little bit there, and you've got teams with 2 archetypes. Would you ever consider deliberately not revealing a Tac Op turn 1 so that your opponent doesn't have knowledge? So what I'm thinking of, let's say Legionary, you might have chosen all security Tac Ops, but you've not shown any security, so you might have Seek and Destroy, you might have security in the opponent's mind, and then because of that, they think that he might have Seek and Destroy, he might have Headhunter, I'll keep my leader back. That sort of thing. Do you see what I'm getting at?
I do, and I absolutely love it. And that is a pro level tip, which is do not give away what Tac Op you're playing until you have to do it. So Corsairs are a great example of this. They have Recon, and they also have Seek and Destroy. And at turn 1, you could reveal a bunch of Recon Tac Ops, and your opponent can then breathe a sigh of relief as they then move their leader forward to be more aggressive against you. But maybe you don't, and then they hold their leader back so they're not a threat of being killed at the start of turning point 2 and giving away TVP straight away. Boom. That is a great little tactical play, and just plays with the mental aspect of your opponent, where it's like, well, do you want to do that? Do you not? Maybe they have this, maybe they don't. And so many games you and I have had where we've done that. I was thinking, I think he's got this Tac Op, but I don't know for sure. So the only way to remove that risk is by adapting my play style to counter it, and then it turns out no, he went the other way, and I've wasted a model. I've held back where I should be moving forward, or something like that. So I think that is a great point, and something you should definitely be using is consider: do I have to reveal it now, or can I wait a little bit? Perfect example: Escort Operative. Do you have to reveal it on turn 1? Absolutely not. Reveal it turn 2. Wait to see how it all plays out, and then make sure you select the most appropriate model at the time. It's a great point.
I think we answered that for him. Nice question. Thanks for asking that.
Yeah, really appreciate the question. Okay, so we're into our tactical tip of the day, which is going to be find a team that matches your playstyle preference. Now, this is critical to your enjoyment of the game, and it will make sure that you actually get the most out of your team. So let's say that you're an aggressive player and you just love removing the other team's models. You need to find a team that's going to reward you for aggressive plays. If you play a team that has no sort of teeth to be able to do that, you're going to be really annoyed, and you're not going to enjoy the games because you're not happy that you're not removing models. So don't play Phobos if you're a hyper aggressive player, because you know you're not going to be getting many kills. So make sure you find that matching. So let's say that if you prefer a patient, cagey sort of game style, well, make sure you select the archetype in your Tac Ops that's going to be your patient and cagey style as well. And I think with this, and we talk about this sort of play style, you need to have a little bit of self-reflection when you go into a game and ask yourself some sort of deep questions. Not deep questions, but surface deep. So questions like, are you easily triggered, right? So is a bad roll once in the game just going to mentally throw you? Because if it is, and you know that you're easily triggered, and you know that one bad roll is enough to make you go, that's it, I'm calling it quits. Maybe just consider choosing a really reliable team where you can guarantee dice results, like novitiates. So you know you're not going to get those terrible rolls, whatever happens. But maybe it's not the most efficient. But at least then you know you're not going to get triggered too easily. But let's say does losing models really get to you? You know, if you really hate the idea of losing a single model, probably avoid hordes like Vetguard, because they are full of chaff and they're just going to die straight away, and you have to accept that you're throwing models out to die. So again, if that's something you don't like, make sure you're choosing the correct team for that. Another example would be, are you really imprecise with your movement? Right, so are you someone that just is bad at measuring or whatever? Maybe don't play a movement team. Don't play like Corsairs where it's all about movement. You know, play a team where you're playing like Intercession or someone, or Nurgle Legionary or Breaches, where you can just sit where you are and be a bit more tanky potentially. Maybe that's the way to go. And if you're a slow player, just avoid high body count teams. Switch to elites. You know, it's probably better for you to play a team where you're guaranteed to get your turns in, rather than having a massive team where you only ever get to turn 2. So having these sort of honest thoughts before a tournament will just massively help reduce your stress and really increase your performance on the day, because you'll be having more fun, you'll be enjoying yourself, you'll want to come back to more tournaments, and you'll be getting the games in complete in the way you want to play. So, consider that strategy that you want to play, consider how you're going to score your VP, and understand that whatever strategy you're choosing has to directly relate to your team choice. So don't be playing super defensive blooded, right? Like, it's just not going to work for you. Make sure you match your team choice to your game plan. That's going to be the tactical tip of the day. Find a team that matches your playstyle preference. Alrighty, I think that's about it, Connor. Anything you want to add in?
Just that tactical tip, I think it's a great tip, but I think obviously we're a tournament focused podcast, but it applies to casual too, and the way that you enjoy the game. So if I'm playing clinically with Legionary, say, I'll probably run Nurgle because I can be quite tight with them. They've got some nasty strats that you can play, and I can be a bit mean with them. If I'm just having fun, and some of the best games I've had, I'm going to run Khorne, and I'm going to go for an all melee team, and I'm coming at you. We'll see if I win, we'll see if I lose. I don't really care, but I'm going to have a blast doing it. I'm going to be in your deployment zone, tearing everyone to shreds with that butcher, and there's not much you can do about it. And eventually he'll die, and I've lost, but it doesn't matter. I had fun. I've removed all your bodies.
I think everyone in the audience is going to be absolutely shocked to hear that you like playing an aggressive playstyle. Wow, I didn't have you as that kind of guy, but absolutely, and that's the point I'm getting at is walking away from a table, irrespective of the result, with a smile on your face because you played the game that you want to play in the way you want to play it, is absolutely huge. So don't choose a team that you think you have a better chance of winning with, but you hate playing because it's gonna not work out for you. You'll end up having the opposite effect where you don't enjoy it, you make mistakes as a result, and you walk away thinking, I didn't have fun, I don't want to play it again. Okay, that brings us to the end of this episode. Hopefully you found something new or useful while listening. If you did, throwing us a like would be greatly appreciated. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any episodes, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you get notifications when the next one drops. If you can't wait and you want early access, we do have a Patreon where you have exclusive access to all of our content ahead of time with a bunch of other stuff on reviews, tier lists, all that sort of stuff, all in there. And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. So drop us a comment below and we'll get right to you. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Ryan. This has been Turning Point Tactics, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.